A very good morning to you and thank you so much for joining us on the KTN News Center. It's Monday morning. We are glad that you could find time to get to understand and know the latest news making headlines right here in the country and across our neighboring borders. My name is Purity Museonzuki. A lot is happening across the country and we want to begin with matters education, whereas the first term of the inaugural junior secondary school came to an end last week. It is very clear that the cohort is still grappling with the teething problems. We now cross over to Kakamega County and speak with our reporter, Alan Ochanda, who is ready to give us more details on what stakeholders are saying on the same. Good morning, Alan.
Well, CBC, the much hyped curriculum that, of course, according to stakeholders, is actually more of a hybrid curriculum, which they say really got the country on the wrong footing. And so they even claim that we began on the wrong footing. But, of course, the first term for the inaugural class came to an end last week amid teething problems that include poor infrastructure in some areas. They totally lack the infrastructure, and also there was this thing called retooling where teachers were actually tasked with ensuring CBC is actually a success, and of course specifically in the junior secondary were actually taken through that induction exercise that actually took 1 week. And according to stakeholders, that was quite an inadequate time to just capacity build the teachers and ensure they teach. Also remember that CBC has 14 teaching subjects, but we saw some teachers, of course graduate teachers, who actually specialized in 2 subjects, were now then deployed to those particular junior secondary schools. And so they have actually been tasked with handling subjects that are not actually got the training in those respective universities where they got their training. Also remember that initially there was this plan to ensure they domicile the junior secondary in high schools, where the later CS for Education, Professor George Magoha, was actually really crisscrossing the country and ensuring that they just erect and construct infrastructure in those particular high schools. But at the last minute, they changed and shifted those schools to primary schools where infrastructure were nowhere. And so let's just join here an education expert to just put these intrigues into perspective as to whether we actually got it right, as to whether the teething problems will be addressed in honest time. And of course, if at all, this particular JSS or rather junior secondary school will be a success in whatever as maybe in a span of how many years. Maybe Karibu Sana Bwana Chess, of course you are an advocate of the High Court, but you have interest in the education sector. Maybe just tell us, we saw the inaugural class really closing last week amid teething problems. Specifically on the issue of retooling of our teachers. Do you think as a stakeholder in the education sector, if at all the retooling program really achieved its intended objective?
Thank you very much, Alan. First and foremost, I do not think we should call the problems affecting CBC as teething problems. Teething problems are problems that can be solved with age as the tooth grows. These are very enormous problems. The first term of the inaugural class has just come to an end, and we can say that the term has been disastrous, to say the least, because in some schools, learners have left without having started learning at all. Remember when government posted teachers, 2 teachers, at times 3 teachers in schools, they were reporting as late as 2-3 weeks towards closure, and therefore learning has not been taking place. They have spent the first time settling in schools and addressing issues of infrastructure, where they should sit, what they should wear, and who should teach which particular learning areas. The idea of retooling, to me, was a good idea if it were to be restructured. If retooling were to take place, perhaps away from the hotels and seminars. If you are taking a teacher who trained in the teaching of mathematics and chemistry, you want to retool that teacher to teach perhaps music, computer, and life skills, you do not require 4 days to effectively retool this teacher. Retooling is just a term that is used basically for an induction of a person into what that person is supposed to do. And therefore, retooling only works where teachers being retooled have interests, have technical knowledge similar to the subjects they're being called upon to teach. Whereas I agree that government has done its part in posting teachers, a number of teachers, in fact more than 70%, were teachers who are teaching humanities. Remember, CBC has 14 learning areas. In these 14 learning areas, we have some technical areas that cannot just be taught by any teacher, whether this teacher has been retooled or not retooled. Areas such as integrated science. Integrated science brings together chemistry, biology, and physics. This is a learning area that can only be handled by teachers who, in their various calling as teachers, were trained in the teaching of sciences. And then we have areas like home science, technical areas. We have areas like art and craft. We have areas like computer and music. I can tell you that very few universities offering education in this country offer music as a teaching subject. In fact, I only know of Kenyatta University and 2 others. To get a teacher of music in this country for a single school is not a walk in the park. Where do we then expect to get these teachers who are supposed to be stationed in at least every junior secondary? And still on this issue of human resource is the manner in which the deployed teachers have been treated. This is the 3rd month. These teachers have not been paid, yet their counterparts in senior secondary schools, in primary schools, have been paid. Where do they get that morale to teach? Have they been retained as volunteer teachers? We therefore need to address these issues to do with human resource as fast as is practically possible, so that when we resume in the next term, at least learning takes off. We are all aware that teachers were redeployed from primary schools to junior secondaries. And this perhaps was one of the best decisions that the framers of CBC and the Commission took. When you redeploy a primary school teacher, you are actually bringing on board a teacher with the requisite experience, a teacher who knows the technical know-how of how to teach these technical subjects. Remember, in TTCs, teacher training colleges, music, PE were compulsory subjects. And when these teachers were brought on board, and even integrated science, they helped the junior secondaries. Perhaps going forward, we need to redeploy more teachers who have been teaching in primary schools and have advanced their studies into diploma and degrees to come and aid their colleagues in junior secondaries who are graduates.
Maybe Wakili, one question here. Of course, initially, the domiciling of these particular junior secondary schools was supposed to be in high schools. We saw the construction of this particular infrastructure. But of course, the equipment like laboratory equipment were not really equipped in those particular laboratories. But at least they had some sort of goodwill in those particular high schools. According to you, of course, as an education stakeholder, was it ill-advised to now shift the domiciling of these particular schools, junior secondary school level, for junior secondary school to primary, or to actually be better to domicile them in high schools?
Thank you. I think, Alan, it was too good, too late, an idea to domicile junior secondaries in primary schools. From the onset, we were advising the minister, the late Professor Magoha, we were advising the PS and the government that it was not practically possible to domicile junior secondaries in senior secondaries because senior secondaries were constrained in terms of infrastructure. They ignored our advice as stakeholders. They went ahead and invested lots of cash into senior secondaries in terms of building classes that are not going to be very, very helpful. If government had the advice of stakeholders then and constructed these buildings and classrooms in primary schools, those buildings are the ones that ought to be used as laboratories for sciences, laboratories for music, for computer, and rooms for home science and music as we speak now. As we speak, the junior secondaries rely on their counterparts in senior secondaries to access laboratories. One is the issue of access. If you do not have a neighboring senior secondary, then permanently you do not have access to laboratories. And that means that throughout your stay in the junior secondary, you may not be exposed to integrated science in a practical form. Number two, even where junior secondaries are closer to senior secondaries that have well-equipped laboratories, those laboratories are strained in this way. We have very many streams A school like Butere Girls, for example, has about 9 Form 1 streams. A school like, let us say, Alliance Girls has about 700 students in Form 1s who are supposed to use the laboratories. Even within senior secondaries, they are not able to restructure their science timetable to fit into their population. And then you want to ask other students from a junior secondary school to come and use their laboratories, even if they were to come. Laboratories are not just merely buildings. Laboratories are the chemicals that are to be found and the learning aids that are to be found in the teaching of sciences in those laboratories. Where do you get them? The issue of funding comes in handy. Government has not effectively funded CBC. Last 2 weeks, they released about 4,800 to 30% of junior secondary schools. 70% of junior secondary schools have not received any funding. And when you ask, you are told by the Ministry of Education that schools have not submitted what we are calling a CUI, a unique UIC, unique identification code. It is the ministry that is supposed to give this unique identification code so that every learner's details are captured in the NEMIS. But here is a ministry which has not given that particular code, has refused to fund schools to the tune of 70%, and they expect that learning is going to take place effectively. That cannot happen.
Well, lastly and so briefly, Wakili, maybe just tell us the discrepancies between the private and public schools, and of course the messes that have actually been witnessed in those particular JSS. Do you think it's too late to address, or maybe it can actually be corrected moving forward? So briefly.
It can be corrected moving forward. We actually have to know, we know that our senior secondaries, our primary schools are strained in terms of resources, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of manpower. However, because CBC has been forced down our throats as a country, we have no other option but to now focus on junior secondaries and develop them infrastructurally, in terms of human resource, in terms of funding, to meet the average standards of an education system. We can't go there if we concentrate a lot of resources and energy into junior secondaries. On the issue of private and private schools, Alan, private schools are commercial enterprises. Is in terms of a willing buyer, a willing seller. So if parents in private schools are actually willing buyers, and CBC has taken off in private schools because it is funded purely by the parents. But in government, there are a lot of discrepancies. Students have nowhere to sit. They have nowhere to teach them. They have no one to teach them, and they have no place to go for the practical subjects. The essence why we ran away from 844, it is because it was theory-based. We were given a curriculum that is practical-based called CBC. But then how does it become practical without the resources to make it practical? The practical nature of a curriculum is to be found in the resources invested in that curriculum. Nice.
Thanks so much, Wakili Ken Echesa here, of course, also an education expert here, really talking about the enormous problems and not just teething problems. Of course, teething is actually an understatement. So really saying that those particular problems can actually be solved. So ranging from poor infrastructure, the lack of equipment, key equipment in those particular in those particular laboratories, that of course are in the junior secondary schools, which are actually now domiciled in primary schools and not in the high schools as was initially envisaged. So Purity, you can actually see that the inaugural class is actually really sort of, for lack of a better word, really getting sort of a raw deal according to the stakeholders. But they really say it can actually be corrected. It's not too late. Purity.
All right, Alan Ochanda, thank you so much for that in-depth discussion on the state of the CBC, even as the first